Guten Tag und willkommen zu unserem Themenspecial. Heute mit dem Schwerpunkt India's Healthcare Market Public Procurement, also öffentliche Beschaffung. Mein Name ist Kirsten Herrmann. Ich bin stellvertretende Leiterin der Exportinitiative Gesundheitswirtschaft und dort für die Öffentlichkeitsarbeit zuständig. Unser Experte heute ist Tarun Gupta. Er ist Geschäftsführer von T&A Consulting und besitzt über 20 Jahre Erfahrung in der internationalen Beratung mit einem besonderen Fokus auf die Gesundheitswirtschaft. Und in der Rolle ist er auch geschätzter Partner der Exportinitiative Gesundheitswirtschaft. Er stellt dort unsere monatlichen regulatorischen Newsletter zu Indien für den Pharma- und MedTech-Bereich. Das bringt mich auch kurz nochmal zu einer kleinen Einführung der Exportinitiative Gesundheitswirtschaft. Wir unterstützen Unternehmen der Branche bei der Erschließung ausländischer Märkte, in erster Linie mit Informationen zu Märkten weltweit. Das sind Branchenstudien, das sind auch diese Webinare und Themenspecials, aber die bereits erwähnten Newsletter auch, regulatorische Updates für die Branchen, für spezifische Märkte. Und ich empfehle Ihnen da, sich einmal auf unserer Webseite umzuschauen. Die können Sie kostenlos abonnieren. Wir unterstützen Unternehmen der Branche auch bei der Vermarktung im Ausland, bei Messen und anderen Veranstaltungen und bei der Vernetzung mit Partnern. Außerdem treten wir in den Dialog mit Entscheidungsträgern weltweit, um die Rahmenbedingungen für ihre Geschäftsbeziehungen und ihre Markterschließungsaktivitäten zu verbessern. Jetzt übergebe ich aber an Herrn Gupta und wechsle jetzt aufs Englische. Welcome, Tarun, and thank you so much that you found the time in those difficult times today to present for us. The screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, and a very good afternoon from New Delhi, India, and good morning to listeners in Europe, in Germany. As Christine mentioned, if I could pick up a slight German, we are in midst of pandemic here in India. The second wave, which was the severity of which was unexpected, and this has thrown a huge spotlight on our healthcare infrastructure. Healthcare infrastructure, or rather lack of it, throughout the country. And this moment will be a moment of awakening for us, where as a country, we fundamentally will change the level of investment, the level of importance, which we will award to our public healthcare infrastructure. So in a way, this is timing is fortuitous, where we are talking about the public procurement in Indian healthcare market. So it's gone through a lot of flux, policy changes. So what over the next 20-25 minutes, what I have done is we've structured the presentation into 4 different parts. First, we will give you an overview on the Indian healthcare delivery, the hospital infrastructure. Second is the public procurement guidelines. What are the policy guidelines? And this has a huge impact on eligibility requirements of foreign companies. Third is the public procurement process. How have the companies participated? What's been their strategy? What are the kind of options available? And finally, a very high level on the registration. This part of the section, I will go fairly quickly. This is more to provide you information at one location, so that when you are bidding or tendering, at this presentation becomes your go-to document as a reference document for the tendering process of opportunities of public procurement. With that, I begin with my presentation on Indian healthcare delivery infrastructure. So what are the key takeaways on this slide? Number one, we are a young nation, literally. Our median age of population is 28. 65% of our population is below the age of 35. This has held very well during the pandemic time. And but still, despite that, we have over 100 million people above the age of 65, right? So till 2030, we are expected to maintain favorable demographics. Second is the change in epidemiological profile. If you see, our disease patterns have changed. Mortality earlier due to communicable, maternal, neonatal, nutritional diseases have declined substantially. They're still not up to the OECD level, but declined substantially. But Indian population is living longer. However, now there is non-communicable diseases, which are causing a huge disease burden. Now, the most important takeaway on this slide is our inadequacy on health expenditure. You look at our health expenditure by countries, even compared to other developing countries, we are significantly lower. You look at a public healthcare expenditure at about 1.5% is amongst the lowest in the world. And our aim is to increase this public healthcare to GDP from 1.5% to 2.5% by 2025. The third key takeaway is the out-of-pocket expenses. 65% of our healthcare expenditure is out of pocket, and this is due to low health insurance penetration. In fact, our healthcare insurance penetration is estimated at about 15 to 20%, of which 3/4 is under government insurance. But there's been a game changer in the last 3 years. In 2018, government announced probably the world's largest public healthcare insurance scheme, where below a certain income level, 100 million families, yes, 500 million people are eligible for health insurance up to 6,000 euro equivalent annually. Government has empaneled close to 25,000 hospitals, about 1,500 surgeries, there's a set price, as well as about $10 billion has been reimbursed. So on this slide, I reiterate the key takeaways: young demographics, low spend of GDP, change in epidemiological profile, and the new health insurance, which is come. Moving on to the next slide. This gives you an idea of the healthcare in delivery infrastructure. It's very important to highlight here a key aspect that our constitution, we have a federal constitution, and certain subjects are a mix on state and federal. Healthcare, there are central government hospitals, there are state government hospitals, and within state government, there are district level hospitals. So if you see, and even when we talk about public procurement, we will talk about differently for a federal level and differently for a state level. Now, if you look at the figure on the left, our primary healthcare is at a village level, at a district level, or secondary healthcare is more at a district level, and tertiary healthcare is more for government-funded hospitals, the large private hospitals. Now, majority of the procurement happens at the tertiary care hospitals, both at the center as well as at the state level. But there are particular peculiarities to the whole healthcare delivery model. If you look at India, about 1/3 of our population is in urban areas. However, if you look at the hospitals, beds, about 80% are in urban center. So there's a big disconnect between the number of hospital beds in urban areas, and rural areas is a long way off to catching up on the healthcare infrastructure compared to urban. In fact, government has announced incentives to take healthcare into tier 2, tier 3 cities. Just to give you an idea of the scale, India has over 50 cities with a population of over 1 million, about 350 towns with a population of over 100,000 to 500,000. So the hospital infrastructure, if you see the figure on your right-hand side, the number of beds is still much lower than WHO average. Our doctors are spread throughout the world, but the ratio vis-a-vis our population of doctors and nurses is still very low. So in summary, what we are saying in this slide is the central and the federal split, the healthcare delivery focus towards urban sector, and large procurement happening on the tertiary hospitals. Moving on. So now I move to the second part, public procurement. Public procurement, India. It's sometimes there are different lack of transparency, paperwork, long timing. These are all the words which come to mind, which is partially true, but things are changing. There is improvement in process, there is transparency. Digitization has been the buzzword to make it faster and more transparent. However, I still say it is work in progress. It's not yet there to the levels in OECD, but it's significant improvement. We have this fascination on L1, okay, the lowest cost. We cannot move away from this fascination. So L1 continues to rule the roost. Then the second, on the policy front, has been our campaign called Atmanirbhar, self-reliant. Today, world is looking for shorter supply chains in the last 14 months. And we are encouraging companies, foreign companies, as a government policy to set up assembly, manufacturing operations. We have announced very attractive production links incentives. Some of the large players like Siemens, Wipro have already entered under the scheme. It's very important to note that Department of Pharmaceuticals is the main body drafting the guidelines for public procurement of medical devices. With that, we move to the next slide. As I said, there have been some recent changes. In fact, as recent February 2021, under this Atmanirbhar, because we have a huge dependency on imported medical devices, 70% of our medical devices are imported. So government announced that most of the tenders will have a minimum local content requirement, starting from 20%, going up to 50% or even higher. In fact, now any company which offers a local content of more than 50%, that's classified as a class 1 supplier, 20 to 50% as class 2 suppliers, and less than 20% is classified as a non-local supplier. So majority of the government tenders, minimum 20% is the domestic content, and most of the central government tenders, which are less than 25 million euros or dollars in turnover, are only open to companies who can supply with at least domestic content. So that's an important policy wherein, and there is a way in which foreign companies are still participating. I will come on that. But one thing which cannot be taken away is the need and the requirement of local content in public procurement. With that, we move to the further slide. I won't go into too much detail on this. It's just the factor on the bidding process, on the tendering process. The first preference is given to class 1. If they are not able to meet the requirement, then it moves to class 2 suppliers. And what is important is how do you define local content? The definition is you remove any imported components and indirect taxes. That's when you define local content. And a very important development what government has done, it has placed restriction on about 135 and 19 plus 19 odd products, which they are saying that only for Indian companies can bid for it. So what are these? These are broadly, if you go, these can broadly be divided. These are 154 odd medical devices, and government has listed the class 1 suppliers for these corresponding devices. You could broadly categorize them into 4 segments: diagnostics kits, consumables, and we've mentioned some of these companies, and there's a reason why we have mentioned these companies. This could also include the Indian entities of foreign companies. That's important. The government does not distinguish as long as the local content is more than 20%. So it could be Indian entities or foreign companies, as you see here. So the 4 categories are diagnostics kits, consumables, the various devices like ECG, X-ray machines, blood transfusion machines, endoscope, and orthopedic like fracture appliances and artificial joints. So these are the 154 where government has said only these local class 1 suppliers can bid for tenders. However, we've done a further analysis. If you see the unique companies are 64, 48, 24 in these various categories. And why we mentioned this is there is a way for public procurement through indirect participation by these companies. And I will talk about that in my summary. The aim is that if these companies are bidding, quite often they need certain imported components. So in a way, these companies could be your customers. However, the end product is going to the public procurement. But your customer could be these companies who are classified as these grade 1 suppliers. Just to give a profile of the manufacturing in India, majority of the Indian companies are small manufacturers. there are 750 to 800. But some of the large companies, there are very few. Have you seen the number? Syringes, we are one of the largest ones in the world. In fact, under this current pandemic, they've been quoted everywhere. So these are some of the segments: syringes, needle, catheters, where we have large companies. Otherwise, majority of our companies are small to mid-sized companies. Okay. Moving on now to in terms of our public procurement process. Yeah. Okay. So you see there opportunities in the public procurement process. Typically, we've already mentioned the tender above 25 million value, euro 25 million value. There are no restrictions. Global tenders can bid in. Certain cases, foreign companies can recruit a local partner to manufacture local content. However, in a lot of cases, government may exempt from the local content. For example, if the product is manufactured under license, if there's a technology collaboration, or in certain cases, there are these global tenders. These are high value tenders where the production system does not exist in India. So examples of high end products with opportunity in public procurement are listed, like imaging equipment, physiotherapy equipment, and there have been successful examples of foreign companies winning these tenders, as you can see, from Europe, from France, Germany, Switzerland. These are, in fact, in the recent past, some of the ventilators have come from Europe because the domestic was not in place. So the opportunities, depending on the quality, depending on the complexity of the equipment, are there, and these tenders can be open to the foreign. But who are the main parties? For public procurement, there are three key stakeholders. One is the central public procurement portal, okay, which is for the central government, all comes under the Ministry of Health, all the hospitals, like All India Institute of Medical Sciences, whichever. So they come, any tender requirement is there on this tender. Okay, if it's below 25 million, it could be a local agent who's bidding or a domestic entity of the foreign company. And if it's above 25 million, the foreign company can bid together. The second is the government's e-market portal. This is becoming, and this started off with low value, but now even higher value items are being purchased on there. And foreign companies themselves or their local agents tend to register on this tender. And many foreign companies, either through their entities or distributors, apply for these tenders. So these two portals registration is something which is a starting point. And in my last section of the presentation, I will go as to what is the process, very high level on this. So Central Public Procurement Portal and GEM are the two main sources where either yourself or your Indian agent needs to register. Going on, this is fairly, why is the need for an entity or a local agent? Because most of the public procurement will come with annual maintenance contract or comprehensive maintenance contract. And these are contracts which are typically service support is executed by the local Indian agent. So hence, that's very important because this will be part of the contract. Then, as I said, you could register on these portal, either local dealer or the entity. Some personal information is required, which I will talk about while registering. And then what happens is sometimes foreign companies for the low value, they tell the agent to bid, their local agent, and if they have a foreign entity for higher value, the Indian entity of the foreign company tends to bid. But most of it now is online, and this bidding process, they can open and check what's the status of the tender. So this is the digitization I was talking about earlier, and hopefully this will bring in more transparency. So this is the central public, GEM. We've also mentioned some private portals. We also track the portals, so you may want to look at them. They have opportunities coming out on what are the tenders coming from the various government. And on the right, what we have mentioned are the state government portals. As I said, every state has their own budgetary requirement for healthcare or budgetary estimates. Although they tend to follow some of the guidelines from the center, but they could have different requirements. So as a sample, we've given you 4 particular states in no particular. These are states which, let's say, are known for more better kind of a healthcare infrastructure. So we've given these examples. India has 28 states. So if you're working with your agents, which I will talk about, agents tend to have a regional presence. So some of your agents may be strong in particular regions and particular states. These are some of the sample tenders we've put together. And so these links will take you to those tenders and give you an idea in terms of what were the tender requirements and what were the peculiarities of those tenders and what was the eligibility conditions of these tenders. Moving on, partnering with a local company, we've already spoken about. We've also spoken about the fact that tenders will come out from these 28 states. It's very rare actually to get one national level tender, very, very rare. Even for a central government institute, that tender would be for a central government hospital in one city. And I have not seen a tender which says all India you have to supply, very rare. So, so regional, so partnering with an agents who have regional outreach is very important and a proven strategy of foreign companies for public procurement. So they could have an agent for northeast of India, for central of India, north of India, west, southern, you name it. So you could have potentially 8 to 10 different agents, especially because of their network within the public procurement space. Some of the larger companies have also set up an entity in India, and not necessarily large scale of operations. That entity could be 1 or 2 or 3 people, but mainly the face of the company and themselves supported by an agent network. This is a summary of what are the options. First option is widely export, a local agent, set up an entity, direct participation on global tender that I mentioned above $25 million, or in case the products are complex and not manufactured in India, indirect participation through those manufacturers of class 1 suppliers where you are supplying components. All of them but need to search for tenders on these 3, CPP, GEM, and state government. And then, of course, if you're looking at manufacturing under license, sometimes the tender may say a threshold value or a transfer of technology. So these are the 2 ways in which export, direct, indirect, and manufacturing, typically either partnership, 100% subsidiary, or on manufacturing under license. The message of all this is, when you're looking at these options, look at from a roadmap of 2 to 5 years, because Indian healthcare public healthcare infrastructure spend is only going to grow. But the challenge would remain of price sensitivity, and the local content requirement is not going away in a hurry. So any market entry options need to take these 2 factors, L1 and local content, plus the fact that they would come with service contracts. These are the 3 which needs to be factor for any strategy. Moving to the last part, which would be fairly quick. As I said, this is more for you to get a helicopter view at one location. And this mentions what some of the eligibility criteria typically is, the turnover, financial strength, previous tenders which you may have bid. Typically, it says if the tender value is €1 million, typically you should have bid or successfully executed projects in the last 3 years over and above that. So there is a last date submission, the usual tender requirements. Then this is for the CPP portal, which I mentioned. And here I would like to mention about digital signature certificate, DSC. And DSC, as I said, even as a foreign director, it can be obtained. If it's a permanent account number, that can also be obtained. And any of the local accounting firms in India can provide this as a nominal charge. This looks complicated, but it's not. That's what I would like to assure. And these are some of the requirements. You log in. Yeah, we love our mobile numbers. So be prepared to share a mobile number if it's you're bidding as a foreign entity, or because we have this 2-step authentication process where you get the one-time password on your mobile. So some of our clients find it different, but that's a requirement in almost all statutory, not only in healthcare. Then moving, we mentioned about the Dsc enrollment. what is the login ID password. It takes 24 hours for the registration. And once you are enrolled, then you can check what is the bid opening live. This is all steps to bring about greater transparency in the process. And these are some of the documents. Most of the tender requirement will have a technical bid round, a financial bid round, and also will have a small earnest money deposit to be paid by way of a bank guarantee from an Indian scheduled bank. The value maybe 1%, 2%, or 5% of the value of the tender. So technical bid, we put together some of the documents which are typically required. And for financial bid also, we've given an indication on the kind of terms which are there. But these are all indicative, which we have picked from a sample of tenders. It could vary for different tenders. And then what we have mentioned is what are the payment terms, some of the additional requirements. If your agent is bidding a manufacturer authorization, if any past you won the contracts, these are all. It's good to have your team an understanding of this, because out of this 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 would be standard for any tender, right? And if you keep them ready, it just fastens the process. The first tender may be challenging because you would see why so many papers. Believe me, we love our paper even though we have digitized. But once you have an order, then you're going through the process. These are some of the payment terms which we mentioned. Payment on imported, and again, it could vary, but this is just a reflection. Yeah, if you look at this slide, if you are telling your Indian agent to bid, that's a self-assessed document which needs to be put in as part of the tender. It just says that you've authorized a so-and-so company or a person to bid on your behalf. Then this is our group, the government electronic marketplace. The first part was the CPP. The second is the GEM portal. And again, you would see some of the similar requirements: mobile number, PAN. Some of the tenders of CPP may be on GEM, but we would still recommend that you register on both. And GEM tends to have some of the smaller value items also listed, whereas CPP tends to be more high value. But now any government department, not only healthcare, government is encouraging every government entity to come onto this portal. And in fact, it's predicted that this may beat even some of the biggest e-commerce players, the amount of buying which will happen on this portal. Any tender, if the value is above a certain level, then it needs to be a bid process. Below a certain level, it can be without bid. And again, the documents, numbers of years of experience, the usual documents, standard parameters, maintenance is still there, and some of the product specific information which is required. This is just a quick summary of one state. How do you apply on a state? So as I said, CPP, GEM, and various state. This is an example of one particular state where you could apply for a tender. We've given an example of Tamil Nadu. For example, here you would see that they are saying that all foreign firms need to have a local agent. So that could be a condition. Similarly, there are 28 states, but we suggest a more planned rollout strategy. So if you're looking to work with an Indian agent, you may want to start with public procurement in southern India, okay, or central India. That allows a staggered and a well thought out approach of catering to public tendering opportunities in the public healthcare sector. It's very rare for a company to go all over India for the public healthcare tender opportunities. My apologies for giving so much information, very text-heavy presentation, but we just wanted to concise this, and we wish you all the best and all the success. Just remember, the Indian healthcare infrastructure spend is only going to go up, and this pandemic has been a rude awakening call, and we expect some positive developments on the spend and the nature of the process. With that, I come to the end of my presentation, and thank you for your patience for listening.
Thank you, Tarun, for this very comprehensive overview, and you don't have to excuse yourself. I think this was very, very worthwhile information. Und vielen Dank auch an Sie alle, dass Sie heute hier dabei waren. Ich kann Sie nur ermutigen, auch auf unsere Webseite zu gehen und dort zum Beispiel auch die Präsentation herunterzuladen. Herr Gupta hat ja gerade in dem letzten Teil nochmal sehr schön für Sie zusammengefasst, welche zuständigen Stellen erforderlich sind, Dokumente und auch wie die Abwicklung der Ausschreibung oder Bewerbung auf eine Ausschreibung verläuft. Das ist vor allem für Sie als Handreichung gedacht. Sie können sich natürlich auch für unseren Indien-Newsletter registrieren oder natürlich auch bei GTI nach weiteren Indien-Informationen suchen. Wir danken Ihnen für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit und wünschen Ihnen noch einen guten Tag.